Welcome to the Mycelium Signal podcast. I'm your host, Konstantin Tuonihovi. My guest for tonight is Dr. Martin Locker from the Perennial Pyrenees project. He is a trained archaeologist and researcher living in Andorra with over a decade's experience in the discipline. Dr. Locker's work has been published in several journals and books. Outside of archaeology, Dr. Locker has a long-held fascination for cultural heritage, mountainous places and all things rustic. In this interview, we cover Martin's thoughts on the zone as a liminal space and its eccentric denizens, Cathars, the German medievalist Otto Rahn, among other related topics. Please note, this is a continuation of the first episode recorded in Finnish with the makers of the Zone documentary, Boris Brander and Juho Aitanen respectively. Greetings, Martin. Can you provide an overview of your professional journey in this regard about the Zone and your current projects over there?
Sure. Well, I run the Perennial Pyrenees research project based out of Andorra, which is very close to the zone. I tend to focus largely on archaeology, ethnography, history of the Pyrenees in general, but with a particular kind of fascination for I would say probably more the Eastern Pyrenees in terms of the Ariège and the Aude, and the Cathar. The Cathar period is an extremely interesting one, and so I've touched on it in previous books, and at the moment I'm writing a much larger book on the history of Christianity in the Pyrenees, which goes into more depth on that subject in particular. I've also written a novel in which Catharism features, but Neo-Catharism features as a kind of primary plot driver. And yeah, so that's kind of, I guess that's how I became, I guess, affiliated and introduced to the Zone project. Because I think that Boris probably found some of my music, because I do some music based on this area of the world, and through that he kind of winnowed his way into some of my work and thought that I might be a good fit for the film.
That's intriguing. I just saw the film last Friday, the opening ceremony of the film, or the opening screening of the film, and it was very good. I was intrigued also with your appearance, of course, and especially the soundtrack was very interesting. Towards the end, there was your song. I don't remember the track name, but it was almost numinous how it played with the film towards the end. What was the track in the end of the film?
I think it was called Souvenir Occitan, which is French for basically Occitan memories. I believe it was on the split album I did, Pyre Numen, with Alphaboots. And they're all of my albums are freely downloadable from my website. I just told Boris, because he asked me if it would be okay to use something. I said, it's all up there, so use whatever you want. And God knows, there's probably about 150 albums up there. So I think he had a bit of a tiresome job trawling through looking for something appropriate. I think I saw the film, and I think they did a wonderful job, really, in balancing a kind of documentary approach along with an impressionistic aspect of giving a kind of a visual flavor and essence of this very curious area of the world.
Yes, it was a delight to see in the big screen, and the sound system was good in the theater, and it was especially exhilarating to hear your music in such a good setting, and the sound system.
Yeah, I only saw it because I'm obviously not in Finland. I saw it on the I got a viewing link to see it, but I would be very narcissistically curious to hear all that on the big on the big sound system. So yeah, I can imagine it'd be quite a different experience.
Yes, definitely. It's always so much more powerful experience to see a film in the big screen than in like a cell phone or tablet or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, of
just
course.
more, it really like immerses you. Well, how would you conceptualize the zone yourself?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, obviously, that's what the whole film's about. That's what the whole film's about. And you can use the old thing of, well, it means different things, different people, which to an extent is true. I mean, personally speaking, obviously, I find the more fringe stuff fascinating as well. But I mean, for me, I get just as much of a kick out of the bricks and mortar little villages, the history, the sites, which are historical sites or indeed archaeological sites in the landscape and the landscape itself. I think that the zone, for me personally, it's a strange collection of kind of, I don't want to sound pejorative because that's not my intention, but kind of backwater settlements and villages, things which are out the way. Certainly, not certainly more kind of obviously rural, and therefore in some cases quite isolated. And there's this intense layer of history, particularly in that period of the 13th and 14th century with the Catharism, but also linguistically due to its Occitan, its culture is quite particular. So the zone is, I think, this kind of strange conglomeration of almost anachronistic elements, which are still very much alive in, I guess you could call it the kind of folk soul of that particular area, or indeed the kind of genius loci of the landscapes. Landscapes are very powerful as well, because of course you have the mountains, the Pyrenees, but also very, secluded woodlands, and there's a lot of space, put it that way. There's quite a low population density, so it is a very intense place, I would say. The feeling of it, whether or not you translate that into, magical grails or aliens coming out of Bugarach is a different matter. But there's a sensation of being somewhere quite unique and quite different.
Yes, I understand. What do you think about the fame of the zone bringing up like more and more people, of course? And what I saw in the two documentaries, the zone documentary by Boris and Juho, and then there is another Finnish documentary which was filmed, I believe, around the same time, at least in part, the Shadowland. Have you heard about that documentary?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I just saw it last week, and I gathered that the zone attracts a lot of the New Age folk.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What do you think the original local people, how have they reacted that the place is getting more and more popular, and there will be lots of hippies and New Age people swarming around?
I think at the beginning is probably a mixture of, surprise at who on earth are these weird people. But also, I mean, it is an industry. Tourism is, for example, the Ariège, and to a certain extent also the Aude, which are the two départements which kind of the zone crosses over into. I mean, these are really some of the poorest regions in France. So having, on the one hand, that does generate money. It does generate tourist money and that kind of thing. On the other hand, of course, you get a lot of expats from England or wherever coming in, and that does drive prices up for the locals in terms of housing. So they're not, I think it's a double-edged sword. And I think at the moment it's probably reaching a tipping point where I'm sure a lot of local people feel we've had quite enough of these people. But because a lot of them don't even speak French, and live there, and they don't speak any French at all, and they hang around together. Each one is convinced that they have the key to this magnificent mystery, and that they alone are being persecuted by the Catholic Church. There's a lot of heavy paranoia in a lot of these people. But on the other hand, as I said, it does generate money in areas in which a lot of the traditional industries can be completely stripped away. So,
yes. Have you met these people? I mean, the so-called luminaries of the zone. Have you met them in real life? I mean, Richard Stanley, for example, and there was this the people who are still alive. Some of them already died. I don't remember his name.
The Urani chap.
Yeah, that one. Yes. Sadly,
I never met him.
I
never met him. I have met Richard, and yes, I met him once in Rennes-les-Bains. I also met one of his former partners who I'm still in contact with. Very, very nice lady. She's deeply involved in the French Gnostic Church. Richard is the only one I've really met of that kind who's still there and still really involved in that community deeply. Very, very hospitable, very, very pleasant. Possibly a tendency towards paranoia as well, although given the circumstances within the past couple of years, that's probably not unreasonable. And he told me a lot about some other people there, who great communes of witches who would move to Montségur and then, of course, started the kind of social civil war with another group of hippies who had moved there. And, it's the same thing as one finds everywhere. If you have a group of people who believe they have the real knowledge, then they're going to get into conflict with other people as well. But I don't know, man. It's because it's so interesting, all of this stuff, even though, let's be brutally frank, 50% of it is complete horseshit. But it's really interesting, It's really, really interesting stuff. But unfortunately, there's a fine line between interesting and compelling and falling off into paranoia and obsession.
Yes. I believe Richard Stanley himself described in either of the documentaries the zone as some kind of a liminal space, like a mutable black hole, which attracts this kind of people all over the world. And it's constantly shifting. And it's interesting to think this kind of liminal space, which is, like I said, constantly mutating as some kind of sinkhole from the ordinary consensus reality around the zone. So if I would compare it to the cruise ships, For example, in Finland, this is a bit of a banal example, but it works, I think. In Finland, we have these cruise ships to Sweden and Estonia, and they are notorious or infamous even liminal spaces, which are like a very crappy Las Vegas on sales. Basically, what happens in the cruise ships stays in the cruise ships, and people really get like completely blackout drunk and do stupid stuff and get into fights, and it's like everybody knows that is the reason that most people, at least young people, go to these kind of cruises. So I believe that people or humans have these tendencies to seek some kind of liminal, and they do so in their own capacity, of course. And I would say that if the cruise ships are kind of like a very banal way to get into some kind of liminal, there are of course more sublime ways. But I would think that
for sure.
this is somehow like, and I'm not even saying this in any kind of mocking way, relatable to the zone, in the sense that it's a place for some people who are like wounded by consensus reality to do their own thing and seek out
definitely. I mean, one of the things about this kind of broader area is that, you know, it's to a large extent, or shall we say to a greater extent than in many other places, you know, if you want to move out here and be left alone, you can be left alone. You know, you can find a cheap village or, you know, whatever, or a cabin or something, and you can rent it, you can buy it. I mean, you know, the prices are generally quite low in terms of property and living and that kind of thing. And if you want to be left alone out here and live in your own little world, you can do that. And, you know, this area does have a huge amount of folklore, you know, mythology. The landscapes are very kind of psychologically affecting because of the little hidden valleys and all this kind of thing in the mountains, and the history and the archaeology, the caves, and this whole mixture, you know, even from a rational point of view, is extremely intoxicating. Now, the problem is when you mix in like a bunch of people who have given up their jobs, who don't speak the local language to a large degree, who hang around with each other. All they talk about is this subject all day, every day. You know, they haven't got a job or anything, or you know, they haven't got an anchor in what we might describe as reality, or the day-to-day, you know, perspective-giving occupations that most of us have. So it's this kind of constant feedback loop of this one like overwhelming subject, and they kind of go a bit loopy, to be honest. And that can kind of go in a really inspired way, or it can take a bit of a dark turn, especially when, you know, if you're mixing in drugs or whatever. You can get some people who are having a pretty, you know, pretty intense trip in this area of the world. And some of this, you know, the material that they're dealing with in terms of symbols and legends, the stories, you know, the concepts of, for example, I don't know, let's take, for example, the Priory of Zion stuff, or, you know, Jesus was buried XYZ there, you know?
Yes.
This isn't like inconsequential stuff. This is pretty heavy stuff. So you load that in as a subject matter which you're just thinking about 24/7 for years, and you haven't got a job, so you've given up your job, you've put your savings here, all your spare time is dedicated to going out and, you know, fucking geomancing Christ's tomb. I mean, you're gonna go a certain way mentally.
Yes.
But, you know, that's what you want to do, man. Fine, you know, I don't care. It's quite, you know, and some of the books these people produce, I mean, you got to admire it. They're labors of love. There's one which is called Genesis.
Oh,
I don't know if you know it.
no.
I'm just trying to find it now. It's who's it by? It's by David Wood, which is a very normal sounding name, but good God. It's 200, I guess, 50 pages of, the most intense sort of diagrams of sacred geometry of landscapes with angles of, the cross of Set, the evil ass, the common womb, in which we have crescent moons and pentagrams layered over maps of, Rennes-le-Château, Rennes-les-Bains, the double impregnation, the arc crescent of Nut, the vagina of Nut, the boat of Isis, symbolic geometry of the labyrinth, all this shit. And you got to admire it. But Christ Almighty, this is, this is a bit loopy.
Yeah, it's interesting how if you are completely divorced from the so-called everyday life consensus reality, like taxes and whatnot, all the things which kind of block human creativity in a like a negative way, and you're free to roam and kind of hunt your own vision over there. This kind of things seem to happen. So would it be too much to say that some people are kind of like have escaped if to quote Philip K. Dick, the black iron prison, in the sense, if somewhat jokingly, but then again, if you compare that kind of thing to normal people living in a city and just like having a very bad time, like filling Excel forms,
Well, yeah, obviously, but I think that, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to be mean or anything. I don't have any problem with these people at all. I think it's a great imaginative quest, and they're doing stuff which is, there's no reason why in some of these things they hit on, points or grains of truth. And you can use all these things to find a way of figuring out what may or may not be going on. And, obviously they're probably having a bit of a better time than someone who's stuck in a shit job in a factory working, 6 days a week, and who hasn't got any time for anything and is just living in a concrete prison. But you can kind of have in between. You can kind of keep a little bit of perspective on things and also be interested in these other areas as well. And they kind of have a real, what I find interesting as well is that they're very, a lot of them are very kind of interested in the Jesus element, but they're very, they have I may be generalizing, but the impression I've always got is that there is a sort of resentment towards the church and to a certain extent towards mainstream Christianity. And it's not because of, it doesn't seem to be because of legitimate arguments against certain practices or interpretations or whatever. It's more of a sort of, I don't know, it's more personal than that, and I don't understand. It comes from a place of resentment, like the Cathar thing, There's a lot of people there who are like, oh, fucking church, let's wait a week. Are we going to prove that this was and it's like, but they would probably, but from what we know of the kind of Cathars, they were anti-church with a big C, in terms of the institution, but they weren't anti-Christian, obviously. Yeah, a lot of these people, they have that element in them, which I don't see how that gels with their their quest to find Christ's tomb or Magdalene's bloodline or whatever, you know. There's a bitterness. There's a bitterness seeping through some of these people.
Yes, this is also quite interesting that some people seek these kind of patterns or something to kind of frame their own life to these kind of things. And also what you mentioned earlier, that they have like a grain of truth or like actual gnosis, perhaps even, or something like that. And then some people just go completely start raving mad over there. I would liken that to the concept of chapel perilons. Are you familiar with that term?
Not particularly, no.
Yeah. So basically, I have discussed this before with my other guests as well, but I think Robert Anton Wilson, the late futurist and like a cultural heretic and troublemaker in the States back in the day, and he had relationship with some kind of philosophical heir to Timothy Leary back in the day, this guy, and his concept of the chapel perilous was basically something like this, that at one part of your life you were like a practicing occultist or esotericist or this kind of person, you might run into this kind of phase where you are not sure that if you're receiving like actual gnosis or some kind of like a divine information, or you are just going absolutely mad with paranoia or something. And it's like if you go through this gauntlet, nobody remains like an atheist or some kind of undecided. You will become like an extreme agnostic, or you will become mad. It's basically that kind of phase that you are flirting with madness. And I think Matt Cardy, my other guest, said that after this kind of gauntlet, if you endure it, you will learn something very valuable. And I think I liken some people over there to this kind of phase, that it's a strong possibility that some people would just lose it completely.
I think it's extremely likely, I'm afraid. Especially when you have these particular subjects, and the inference is that something has been deliberately hidden by a kind of a power, and that it is your duty to uncover it. You know, it can get all-consuming. I think that's probably part of the reason why people are so kind of vociferous in the zone.
Yeah, the paranoia, and I think it comes with the territory. And if you're dealing with this kind of thing, and yeah, it's interesting psychologically that where does this paranoia come from? And I think this kind of concepts, like you just said, are so powerful that you would be good to kind of, how would you say, have the proper precautions and kind of the safety equipment to handle them, in the sense that like you in the previous episode with you, I think you said about the archetypes, that people don't probably understand how powerful they actually are, and they kind of how would you say, they are too haphazard or like
too flippant.
They don't know what they're missing with. Yes. I think I also think that Craig Williams, his American fellow, he said in one interview, and he's an author too, and he said that if you are having to do something with the occult or the esoteric, it would be a good thing to have a sound sanity, in the sense that you will be easily swayed, and something will break, if you put too much pressure, and it's already fragile.
No, yeah,
And I'm not trying to
no,
sound
no. I
alarmist
think
here,
he's absolutely
but
correct.
yeah,
I do actually have. I think I have a couple of his. I think I have a couple of his books. No, I think he's absolutely correct. I mean, you really,
very good point.
you got to have. You can have your head in the clouds, but you got to have your feet on the ground for this. And you really have to be able to kind of step back with things in a bit of perspective, and not let things run away with you.
Yes, I think this kind of like some kind of like a pressure testing, and like you said, boots on the ground, at least once in a while, and just like step back for a bit and trying to assess the like a bigger picture and trying to eliminate like egoism and this kind of stuff would be a good idea, I think.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing, though. That's another thing is that God, now it sounds like I'm really bashing all these people. It's not the case, but there is also with this tendency of I am the one to uncover this.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a completely selfless endeavor. There is a sort of personal glory aspect attached to it. So ego is definitely a large feature in a lot of these communities where you have a lot of these people gathering together, living. Rennes-les-Bains is the place probably, which is just below Rennes-le-Château. And there's a great deal. It's actually where Henry Lincoln lived for a great deal of time, up until he died, I believe. But there's a great deal of people there who either live there full time or live there, seasonally. And these are the self-described truth seekers as to, what's going on with the Priory of Zion and the Grail and da 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 da. So, and they all believe they each individually have the right answer, and they are all individually the most persecuted person by the Catholic Church because they hold a secret which would devastate people's belief around the world.
Yes.
It's unlikely. Let's be honest.
One thing came to my mind, which we touched upon earlier, is that I know at least a few or more Finnish persons who have visited you deliberately at your dwelling grounds, or at least you have been their guide. And for example, Boris and Juho, and I believe the late Finnish reporter and author Perttu Häkkinen also visited the place, and he had something to do with the original plans of the documentary Shadowland, but he passed away.
I think so,
sadly. Yeah, a couple of years ago. A few years ago.
Yes, I never met him, but I think 2 years ago or 1 year ago, I can't quite remember. Maybe it was 1 year ago. Aki and Ike came over to see some of these places, and I showed them, the Bethlehem Cave and some other sites which were pertinent to to the whole kind of Cathar, allegedly to the Cathar thing and that kind of thing. But no, there is a decided Finnish interest in these things. Why? I'm not entirely sure. I guess probably spurred. I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure. I always had the feeling that the Finnish sort of the Finnish occult interest community, if you can call it that. In my small experience, although it's certainly in terms of ratio larger than my experience with other national groups, they seem to have their heads most grounded when they're talking and exploring these things. Of course, it's interesting, fascinating, and in many cases highly believable. But there is time for a bit of a joke and a laugh, and a bit of perspective giving as well. So I have only good things to say about the Finnish contingent of the occulture.
Yes, I have yet to visit the place myself. I visited actually Pyrenees, but that was around maybe say 35 years ago.
So it's probably changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, I only remember that during the summer when we were passing through the Pyrenees to the Spain from France with my family, I only remember that I had a snow fight with my father, and during the summer it was just completely exotic and hilarious that you have snow during the summer. And I also
I think
remember
very
the
high.
Serpentine.
Yeah, unfortunately,
The
that's probably changed a little bit. I'm afraid the snow, the window for snow is getting a little bit shorter each year. So I'm afraid there won't be any more summer snowball fights for you.
Damn.
But,
The history of the place is fascinating with the Cathars, and we briefly discussed the German seeker Otto Rahn with Boris and Juho. And can you bring some more light what he was what he was exactly doing over there? Was it in the 30s or 40s last century?
yeah, 30s. Well, from what I understand, his first kind of he first went over off his own back, as in he wasn't affiliated with the Nazi Party at that point. He was a young, I guess you describe him as a kind of medievalist of sorts, and he was under the very strong impression that the the Grail Castle, which is so often discussed in Vulcanbach's Pastoval, he had happened upon this concept that in fact it was the same as the Montsalvatsch, or the Montségur, shall we say, over here in the Montségur Castle. He'd made this link. I'm not sure at what point he made the exact link between the two, but I'm pretty sure that when he first came over, I believe it was in the early 1930s, he was self-funded, I believe, and looking for this. And he wanted to meet as many local people as possible who knew about the castles, and to an extent, he'd also been reading up on the Cathars, in the heresies. His first book, Crusade Against the Grail, it has a lot of Grail stuff in it, but it's also a sort of largely a kind of historical view of the Cathar, the Albigensian Crusade, the crushing of the Cathars. Again, like all historical overviews, I mean, it has a great deal of flaws because at the time, sources which we can now use were not necessarily available. But it is a very interesting book, and it's certainly a very evocative one, just like his next more famous one, which is the Lucifer's Court. That was written later. Yeah. First came Crusade Against the Grail, which was his kind of historical book, so to speak. He spent, I'm not sure how long he spent over here, possibly about, I want to say a year, it might even have been longer. It's all very murky. He did become very quickly acquainted with Antonin Gadal, he was a local from Tarascon sur Ariège, and he was a very passionate sort of history lover of the area. He was also very patriotic about the area. He was also, a fact which is largely glossed over by a lot of the fans of this whole thing, he was also I think he was either head or high up in the Tarascon tourist board. So, there is a theory that a lot of this neo-Cathar sites, such as the caves of initiation, and all that which he wrote about in his book on the path to the Holy Grail, it's largely a figment of his imagination. I mean, the caves are certainly fortified, but that is a feature of this larger area. They're called spulgars, which is basically a fortified cave, because it's a great place to keep a lookout at the valley below, in case of anyone coming up who you don't want to come up, or who needs to pay a toll, or whatever. This is a very feudal landscape in the medieval period. But yeah, so Otto Rahn met Anthony and Godal on that first trip. They became very good friends. And he met a few other members of the kind of local aristocracy, which had their own interpretations of things. And then he went back, got his book out. It picked up the attention of Himmler, who, of course, was shitting himself with joy at the thought of finding a Holy Grail. That's just up his alley. So he effectively commissioned Rahn to go back and to go to other places as well and write about his findings and try to get the Grail, which resulted in this sort of hyper mythopoetic travelogue, really, which is Lucifer's Core. Very evocative, deeply flawed in terms of historical accuracy, but very, very evocative of the region.
Was there some kind of stone which, if you rub the stone, it will kind of like a bleed red, like a bleed blood? And was it somehow related to the Lucifer's Court book?
Well, is the problem is with all this stuff is you're talking about kind of the post-war mythos.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff gets wrapped up. I mean, I have yet to really pinpoint something which describes those stones, because you can find those stones down on the riverbeds by the Devil's Bridge, just near Foix. I think that's where Aki found a few of them, and effectively, what it is I believe it's a high iron content. You wet them, you rub them together, and some of the iron oxides effectively leaches out the stone in a very vivid red, like blood. The symbolism, what people may have thought or whatever, is of course hugely up for debate. I don't know where this connection came from with the Grail, Lucifer's Court, and these stones, because from as far as I remember, the kind of the stones involved in this, fallen from heaven. I don't know. It's possible that they could be talking about a kind of meteorite aspect, but then again, a meteorite, it looks very different to these stones. I can't remember what they're called, but they're not. Again, it sounds like I'm being I'm pissing on everyone's parade all the time. It's not that, but I mean, these stones aren't incredibly rare around the world. I mean, it's not an unknown phenomenon. It's just it's a very, very, very high iron content.
Yes, I believe Aki had this stone in the zone, and he rubbed it, and the red, blood, so-called blood, red came out, and it was visually very interesting, intriguing looking thing.
Well, for that, it may have attracted a huge degree of folklore.
Yeah.
From that,
back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in terms of the direct link between that and Rahn's mythos, I'm not sure where it comes in, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, this is just something that just came to my mind, that I'm by no means any kind of expert in this field, and that's big. That's, of course, I'm interviewing you about this.
I'm gonna let you down there.
No problem. This is just an idea which came to my mind. Do you think Otto Rahn was part of the Ahnenerbe group?
Well, I think he. I don't know, actually. I'm not sure if he was directly under their umbrella or if he operated a little outside of it. He was obviously in the SS. I'm not sure as to what exactly he was supervised by. There's a lot, it's the same with all this stuff. There's a huge amount of rumor. I'm pretty sure that he accompanied the Ainala to Reykjavik. I think they went with him there.
Iceland.
But I'm not sure whether he was under the direct payroll. Some people have suggested he actually was very. He effectively had an open channel with Himmler, and also with that other eccentric chap, Willigut. Apparently, other people say that there are reports of him meeting Willigut, the Wizard of Wurlesburg, and getting on very famously. But I mean, all this stuff is very, very muddy in terms of concrete connections. I'm sure he would have had an association with the Arna, but that would be logical.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure as to how directly involved they were together.
Yeah, didn't he had some kind of falling in, or like a crutch with, or some kind of a problem with regime, and he ended up being found or like frozen in some. Was it in Austria?
Well, there are a few things. I mean, again, a lot of this is unproven, although there is. I mean, it seems to be reasonably well established he was a homosexual, which wouldn't have gone down too well in the SS. There are reports of him being a very pompous guy, actually, in the SS, which didn't make him terribly popular. There's also rumors of the fact that he may have had, I think, a Jewish grandmother. But again, that doesn't seem to have been. It wasn't common, but I don't think it was absolutely unheard of. And a lot of people's family trees, when they were submitted to the SS, certain things were omitted or, brushed under the carpet because, we don't need to know that, So,
yeah.
And also he didn't actually produce anything at the end of the day for Himmler. A book, yeah, but no object. And it's quite a lot of money was spent on him, I think. So I think it just got a bit too hot for him in general, all these things going on. And I think he was kind of the story, which doesn't seem to be too illogical, was that he was kind of given the choice of you can either take the noble way out, or your name's going to be dragged through the mud, and it won't be good for you or for your family.
Oh,
so the thought is that it's probably quite likely he topped himself in the mountains. There's a lot of stuff like, there's a double body, a different person. We found him 2 decades later in Montségur as an old man, and he was telling us how awesome it all was. All this kind of stuff. Yeah. I think he probably topped himself in the mountains.
Wasn't there some speculation that his possible suicide was some kind of ritual Cathar suicide called Endura or something?
Yeah, but that wouldn't have worked. That wouldn't have made sense because the Endura. Okay. A lot of people chuck around the word Endura thinking it's just suicide. But it's what it is. But what it really is effectively starvation, and was taken on largely by people at the end of their lives. Usually, if they were sick or infirm or old, the Endura, which even then wasn't common, it was seen as a very, certainly a rare step, a rare demonstration. It was effectively suicide through starvation and fasting and not taking in water. It wasn't, I'm dead. So, there's speculation about, because I think that allegedly the day that he died, or the date of his death, was chiming in with the fall of Montségur or something, and possibly he chose that date because it meant something to him. I think he certainly felt a very deep personal connection with the landscape and the story and the Cathar ethos, even though I don't want to sound snobby here, but I wonder how much of the actual, I wonder how much of the actual Cathar theology, if we can use that word, he really understood or knew. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but it's only really recently, with as in the past 50 years, 40 years, with the discovery of certain texts, like in the Nag Hammadi library, or in some Dead Sea Scrolls, Gnostic texts, etc. Post-war discoveries of texts which were thought to be either non-existent or lost, that we have an insight into some of the more Gnostic views, which potentially influenced, Manichaeism, and then and the Bogomils and other heresies, other sort of heresies which had a more of a Gnostic flavor, So I don't know how much. I don't know if his conception of what the Cathars were was a hyper-personal one rather than one rooted in probability. Put it that way. More romantic, I would say.
Yes, I see. Can you give some hints or recommendations, for example, books where people could learn more about the zone? I mean, the more like an actual and factual history of the place.
Difficult. Because no one's really written about the area as a whole, at least, in English, for example. Well, apart from me, obviously. You can find my books on my website.
Yes.
But it's there are good books about the specific subjects. Okay, and some of them have elements which are certainly a bit more speculative, shall we say? For example, if you want to go down the more speculative stuff, but which still is rooted in historical research, you've got Jean-Marc Gall, Montségur and the Mystery of the Cathars, and his Church of Mary Magdalene, which goes into the Rennes-le-Château stuff with Saunière, and that's a whole other rabbit hole of conspiracy. And I think there's Sean Martin has quite a good, concise book about the Cathars and the history of the Albigensian Crusade. There's another very good study of the Cathars, printed. I think it's originally in French, but it's been translated. I'm just trying to find it now for you. I think it's simply called The Cathars. Produced in, I believe it's in Toulouse. Of course, now I can't. Oh yes, here we are. The publisher is MSM. It's called The Cathars, imaginatively, and it's a very good. It's a very good resource, actually. Yes, it gives a good overview of the whole crusade, of some of the sort of theological origins of certain things, and very good indeed. MSM is the publisher, and it's a kind of collaborative effort, so it hasn't got a single author. It's simply called The Cathars. I believe it's published by also In Situ, is another thing. Yeah, but there are many. I mean, there are quite a few books which will deal with the history of the area, in a factual way, which are worth getting your hands on. Unfortunately, being caught on the hop like this, I don't have anything else particularly to hand. I have to go through my books. But on the other hand, of course, there's a huge industry of hyper speculative, or we could say lunatic fringe books, which are great fun. I mean, tremendous fun. But I wouldn't take it, too seriously.
Well, thank you, Martin, for these recommendations and your expertise on this field. And I would advise the audience to seek out your website, perennialpyrenees.com. It has all your music and I believe other text as well, and also your books. You have written fiction too.
Yeah, I got fact and fiction up there. So, in fact, and there's one actually, not to plug things too much, but there is a novel which I wrote called Stones Beneath a White Star, which obviously the premise is fictional, but it's set largely in the Ariège and deals with the kind of fallout of a neo-Cathar commune in the sort of the 1970s. And there's quite a lot of possible, as in researched and potential Cathar theology embedded in there as a fun little read.
Yes, I would imagine.
So that's there as well.
Yes, thank you, Martin, and have a good evening.